Hey all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we are revisiting the LG G6 in late 2019/early 2020. In this particular video, we won't be diving as deep into every nook and cranny of its features as we typically do in retro reviews, but rather we will be briefly exploring this device in terms of reminiscing about its design, its specs, how it generally holds up now that it's over 2 years old, and some of my thoughts and opinions about it looking back at it. So to begin with, in terms of the design, it still looks like a very beautiful phone because it's a glass sandwich. It was really the first time that LG began taking construction quality seriously. They were a little bit behind Samsung at the time. This was also when Samsung released the Galaxy S8, but the Galaxy S7 already had quite premium glass and metal materials, compared with the G5 that came out the year earlier that was also a contemporary with the aforementioned Samsung Galaxy S7. So again, LG made an evolution here, and the phone just felt really premium and striking. With its aluminum band, the top retained the standard 3.5mm headphone jack, and international variants of the smartphone sold in Asia also had a quad DAC. So LG had a big emphasis in terms of music quality, and even today it still holds up as an audio player. If you're an audiophile, it's one of the best sounding smartphones in terms of being able to drive even large, expansive headphones. Now on the rear, there's dual cameras. Instead of using one for bokeh, though, LG has historically gone with a wide-angle lens, again from the days of the G5 carried forwards. Both cameras are 13 megapixels, which was a bump from the G5's secondary wide-angle lens, which was only 8 megapixels, so this was an improvement. There's also a fingerprint scanner that doubled as a power on-off key, a pretty nice placement that was ergonomic and more sensible than the same generation Galaxy S8, which had the fingerprint scanner close to the camera and it easily smudged. So as a whole, it was a simple but also very attractive design, with the shiny chamfers and edges which reflect and catch against the light. It was a slightly more blocky phone, not quite as pebble-like in the hand as the S8, which had more rounded corners, but as a result, the LG G6 also felt more substantial and easier to grip in the hand. This sense of sturdiness was also backed up by military specifications in terms of shock resistancy, and it even offered waterproofing for the first time. The front of the phone also looks fairly modern even today. It was among the first generation of devices to come with the elongated 2:1 aspect ratio for the screen, with rounded edges that made a delicate touch. The screen is a IPS panel with 2K resolution, also offering HDR10 support, which was pretty new at the time, enabling really saturated and punchy looking colors when watching HDR compatible content from sites like Netflix, Hulu, and even YouTube these days. There is of course still a small bezel on the top and the bottom of the phone these days. It's not truly bezel-less like on some recent devices with hole punch displays, for example, but still looks quite good, and you can see the overall dimensions are very similar to the previous LG G5, despite the G5 having a much smaller 5.3-inch screen compared to the 5.7 inches of the G6. So that's where the new aspect ratio really helps, even though the body is overall about the same. However, it does feel a lot more premium just because of its new construction materials compared to the G5, which feels more like a toy by contrast. And we can see how the G5's older aspect ratio does mean there's a larger bezel on the top and the bottom, which means a less impressive screen-to-body ratio. So overall, the design I think has held up really quite well. I think it's really as beautiful as the Galaxy S8 when you hold it in your hands, and feels equally as premium. Now, one of the reasons why you may want to consider this phone is going to be the price. LG's phones have never really retained value all that well, and especially the G6, because it was released alongside the S8, which got a lot of promotion and hype, compared to the G5, which was also released with a slightly weaker set of specifications, including an aging Snapdragon 821 processor that's very similar to the previous year's G5's 820 processor in terms of performance. So it wasn't really a huge bump in terms of the CPU, compared to, say, the S8, which had the newer Snapdragon 835. So as a result, the G6's value degraded really quickly, and these days you can find it on Amazon or eBay in refurbished condition for under $75, sometimes as low as $50 if you shop around. So this is definitely in budget price territory for an unlocked smartphone. pitting it against new phones today like the Galaxy A10e, for instance. However, I would say that the G6 still has stronger specifications, with the Snapdragon 820 still being a pretty capable processor. Even though it's quad-core and not, say, octa-core, it still handles itself quite well in terms of performing tasks like watching videos. Even doing some gaming, it can still zip through. The interface navigation is fluid and smooth, like we saw on the G5 retro review that we did a while back. It's still a very fluid experience. Perhaps the best upgrade on the G6, however, is the fact that the battery life has been optimized a little bit more. The capacity inside has also been enlarged compared to the LG G5's really small 2,800 mAh pack, which never lasted through an entire day, compared to the G6, which now has a 3,300 mAh capacity cell, which is larger than the Galaxy S8, and for a pretty compact 5.7-inch phone, which again is pretty ridiculous to think of, but these days it's really easy to hold one-handed, it actually will last you for a day or even 2 days before you need to recharge it again. Now, other areas where again it lags a little bit behind with the S8 would be it does have slightly older Bluetooth version 4.2 as opposed to Bluetooth version 5.0, but it still comes with the regular GPS, again NFC, wireless charging, the essentials that we've come to expect from a flagship phone. And like the S8, the G6 came with 4 GB of RAM, which is a little on the low side these days, but for a mid-tier or even a budget phone, it still is more than acceptable and can be used to smoothly open up a handful of apps, watching videos, and interacting with games without too many problems, as long as you keep an eye out on closing things that you aren't using in the background. Now, it also has been upgraded to Android 9.0 Pie a few months back in September, which is fairly up-to-date, similar to the Galaxy S8. It probably won't receive any future software updates to say Android 10.0, but at least for now it still is perfectly acceptable in terms of security and being able to install the latest apps from the Play Store. So that's more or less it for our revisited look at the LG G6. In 2019, I still think it's a pretty good option as a budget smartphone. It's a device that's been often forgotten about, but again, for around $50 to $70, it still is an incredible value in terms of the construction quality, definitely still feeling and looking like a flagship. The display at 2K resolution, it still holds its own and is stronger than most other budget phones you'll find at the price. And again, the performance with the Snapdragon 820, although not cutting edge, will still perform as well as many mid-tier new CPUs today, like the Snapdragon 660 is still roughly the same in terms of raw benchmark. So you'll be satisfied for using it for gaming purposes, for using it to watch videos, things like that. General UI navigation is still very smooth, and again, we do have a pretty up-to-date version of Android on board. So overall, I would still say it's a good phone to recommend, with great build quality, a really nice set of cameras, especially with that wide-angle lens, despite having some weaknesses like a skin on top of Android by LG, which is a little on the heavy side, definitely not one of my favorites on the market. But overall, it's passable. You can always use one of your own launchers, as well as a slightly weaker front-facing camera and slightly older Bluetooth version. But again, for the price of around $50, it's kind of hard to complain about. Still is an excellent option that I think is worth remembering about for budget-conscious buyers. Spending the extra $10 to $15 for the G6 I think is a better choice than the G5 here in 2019 because of the newer version of Android, in addition to the longer battery life and better display. And it still remains about half the price of the S8, even in the used market if you're looking for a refurbished model. So again, it's a really good value, even though the performance isn't quite up to the same level of the S8's 835. So anyways, you can check out more details if interested in the links down below, but for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been our look back at the LG G6.